My names are Abraham Muli Ogal. I'm 26 years old. I come from the family of 3 wives. My mother was the first wife. Then my second mother came with 2 children which were boys. Then the third one came with 1 boy who was older than me. But on my side, I did not see my mother, so I don't know whether they got divorced or she died. I grew up with my father until the age of 5 years when he passed on in 1999. At that time, so after he died, I was now staying with my stepmother, who is the third wife. And the third wife, at the time my father died, she started to make alcohol. So both of them, both her and the son, they were both going to the place where they were making the alcohol. So I was being left home without no food. So I was just at home. So one day I wake up very early in the morning. I enter into the house, which is the house of my father. Usually whenever they went to job, they always close the door. But at that day, they left the door open. It's like it was a setup. So when I enter into the house, I look on the table and found 10 shillings. So the way I was hungry, because I did not take anything at night, and this morning around 10 o'clock. So I picked these 10 shillings and went with it to the hotel to get porridge. When I reached there in the hotel, I found some of the friends of my father. So they asked me, why are you here, but you don't usually walk this far? And I told them that I came here for porridge. Then they bought for me the porridge, and after taking the porridge, I went back home with my 10 shillings. But when I went back home that time, I find now the door is locked and no one is at home. So I just go into my room, which was built for me as the first son of my father. So at that time, I didn't know any plan which they were planning. So according to them, they always come late hours, around 10 o'clock at night. But on that day, they really came early at home, around 5 p.m. So they just prepared the food. After preparing the food, they stored the food up to around 10 o'clock p.m. So after preparing the food, so when the time come around 10 o'clock, she sent the son to come and call me inside my house. So when the boy entered the house, I asked the boy, why is it today you are coming to call me for supper, but you always don't call me when you have already cooked? But the son did not answer me. And I just wake up and go to the house, and when I enter the house, they close the door. And so I went at the table and washed my hands. I want to start eating, and I heard the voice from the bedroom when she was telling me to go at the corner, but I didn't know anything. When I went to the corner, she instructed the boy to bring the things they bought. So when the boy came out, I saw the boy with the dry grass, new rope for tying cows, and 3 liters of paraffin. Then she came and grabbed my hands, tied with a rope, grass, and then poured the paraffin, then lit the fire. As the fire was burning, because the rope was really tight. The rope, when I was trying to like cut the rope, but the rope entered into my skin and so it stamped the skin. But they did not help me. Even everyone in our neighbor, all people have already slept. So I just tried how I can open the door and went outside. When I went outside, I dipped my hands inside there's some holes around our house with water. So I just dipped my hand inside, then the fire goes off. Then after that, I ran up to there's a friend of my father also staying a bit far from our home. So I went there if I can get the oil, this gun oil for smearing. So when I went there, the person just gave me the oil and I went back home. And the man went to call our assistant chief of the area. When our assistant chief came, it's like my stepmother gave him 700 shillings for that matter to be kept quiet. So the assistant chief went that way. So this stepmother locked me in the house for 1 month without treatment, without no food, water. So I was just starving there. So because my hands was already rotting, so my flesh was just falling down, and also I could not even talk. So anybody who was walking outside could not even hear my voice, because staying for 1 month without water, food and other things, it is difficult. So there's only little energy. So the way I was alone in the house, all my hands was stuck on mattress. I cannot remove the mattress. So one day, because my father was a policeman at that time, before he died. So after he died, so those people were the people he was working with, was walking around like after 2 months, after months. So they were coming. So that day they came out, and I was always our community people usually call me with my grandfather's name. So when they called, my voice could not be heard from outside. So at one point I just feel the sound just come out, and I told them just to break the door and get in. And when they get in, they found the house was really smelling. When they look at me, they just say not to tell the stepmother anything about their coming. So the next day at around 4 a.m. they came with the policeman and other people. Then they take me to our nearest hospital, which is found in Kombewa.
We heard through the media that there was a child who had been burnt by a stepmother, and the child was at the district hospital. So at that time I was in Nairobi, so I never took my time immediately to go there. Then when I came back in October, same year 2001, now as I tried to look for the boy, fortunately, just as I was approaching the district hospital, I found a boy with a small cloth bag hanging on one of his hands, because both hands were just meat. Yeah, I don't know how to call it. It was just meat. Everywhere was meat. So then I stopped, and I was with one of my adopted daughters also. Then he was trying to beg. Then instead of giving him money, I first asked him what had happened to him. Then he told me he had been burnt by a stepmother. Then I asked him, are you the child that is at the district hospital? Then he said yes. So we gave him the money. He wanted the 10 shillings. Then I told him I'll be coming back to see him. So I asked him the ward in which he was. He said he was in ward 5. Then I went to town and I went to look for some more money, because I didn't see why he could be out of the hospital with that state. So when I came back, I found he had entered the hospital. Then I inquired from the nurses why the boy could go to the street to beg with all the hands both like meat, because he wasn't healing at all. So the nurses said the boy now has been there for over 5 months and nobody comes to see him, and therefore he's a patient that they don't know what to do with. Then I asked, but why don't you guys give him proper treatment? Then he said the nurses told me they have tried and that is where they had reached. So then I started the process of finding a way to remove this boy from the hospital, because from the day I saw him, I was now sending people every day. Even if I don't go, I'm busy, I must send somebody to go and bathe him and even to go and feed him, because the boy was feeding mostly on liquids, the things like juices or sodas, because there was no hand for him to hold anything. Like now the hand that you saw, both hands were like that and they are wet. He could not. So he was kneeling and drinking either it is porridge, tea, what he could. And if it is something solid, he could just eat kneeling down because there was no space for the spoon. So I started asking them how I can remove the boy from the hospital, because they told me that only good Samaritans took the child to the hospital. Then they told me I have to go find out from where the child has come from and see the local administrator and then go through courts to get the boy out of the hospital. It took me another 8 months to complete that, but now life was a bit easier for him, because whenever I sent people there to help him or I go personally, we could feed him, and he could even eat bananas through assistance of the children that I was living with here. These children could go and wash his clothes and bathe him. So within the 8 months I tried to find out. I managed to get to his community, and the close relatives, as the court wanted them to come and sign for me, they never wanted to. And now when I tried to go back again to find out the reason why this boy was burnt, I found that it was the assistant chief who through he concluded with he wanted the piece of land which belonged to the boy's father, but they were convincing this second mother to sell the piece of land to them, and then she runs away, because she had just been married, and then the father never took many years, and then the father died. So I discovered it was a corrupt case that if I went into, it would never end. So I only decided that what I want to do is to save the life of this child. So then I started going through the chief. The chief told me that according to him, he knows that the boy's mother abandoned the mother when the child was an infant. But whether she died, where she went, or what, nobody knows. So he told me that the only thing we can write, we don't know the whereabouts of this boy's mother. We believe this woman must have died, because it is not normal for a woman to run away when the child is an infant and never turned back again. So we also concluded that this child was a total orphan. So the chief wrote to me a letter, and I took the letter to the court, and now I started seeking for official adoption. So the court told me that I must get two very close relatives to sign, which took another 2 months. The relatives refused. Then I went back to the chief. I told the chief, what do I do? This child is suffering whenever there is an accident, like there were so many accidents during those days. If there is an accident, the boy is put to sleep on the floor. And in fact, that made him contract pneumonia, very strong one, which really disturbed him for many years. But later he became okay. So the chief said, as the chief of the area, I'm allowed to sign on behalf of any relative that you took the boy rightfully. So after he had signed, now it was a year. Then I took the letter to the court. The court stamped the letter. They took the copy, and I was given the copy to take to the hospital for the boy's filing. So I took the letter to the hospital, and they allowed me to collect the boy. They told me, go and come back after 2 days. We shall give you the boy. So on 22nd of February 2001, they handed the boy back to me. He lived here as a special child, and I really gave him a lot of care. If he ever lived with a careless person, the boy could have not survived, because it was like he had lost hope in life. For 1 year and a half that he was at the hospital, nobody went to see the boy. Nobody visited him. Because it was so bitter for him, I told him that for you to heal first you have to forgive this mama who did this, who burnt you. Yeah, because if you don't forgive her and this thing sticks into your heart. And I reminded him that I believe that for all this time, I find you when all your hands were still wet. I didn't understand why even the treatment you were given at the hospital never acted on you, because everything was just meat, as if the boy got burnt yesterday and it was now a year. So I told him that for you to heal, God wants you first to forgive that mama. If she had bad motive, that is fine. But you, God does not want you to hold any grudge with anybody. Leave God to control you and everything that is around you. But assume that nobody did anything bad to you. And so every time I could ask him, have you really forgiven that mama? That yes. So every time when I was dressing him and I could see some places drying up, I could ask him, don't you see that you are healing? You are healing because you have forgiven her. That mama will continue forgive her. And even now, if I can find where to find her, I can go and greet her and talk to her and tell her that it is Satan that worked on you. And that I can see him healing. So every day that was what we were talking. As I'm dressing him, I could ask him, don't you see how you are healing so fast? Because of forgiveness. And so he was now teaching other children who also came in with bitterness that it's good to forgive.
As per the act, for us all, as the world, as the people, we are all fall as we get problems every time in the world. So as per my stepmother, I can say that I've forgiven her and I've set her free. anytime, anywhere she want to meet me, she should not be afraid of coming to me because of what she did to me at that time. Because even if we didn't forgive others, we will not also be forgiven. So I am already forgive her, and I hope that we are still one family, because she is my father's wife and she acts as my mother.
I first met Mama Delphine in 2006 in the United States. She was talking about the Curando Education Center, and I was so impressed with the work she was doing to help widows and orphans and those in need in her community that I was compelled to assist her. She was already doing the work, but she needed some help. So I created, got a few people together in the United States, and we created a nonprofit called the Ripple Effect Project. One of the students that Mama Delphine had taken into her center was Abraham. Abraham, when he was 7 years old, was burned by his stepmother, and his hands were very deformed. Delphine found him on the streets begging, realized he was the child that had been reported in the news as being abused in this way, and started taking care of him. She worked for a year to be able to have legal custody of him, and when Abraham was 9, he came to the Curando Faith Education Center, and Mama Delphine has cared for him since. When I came to the center as a representative of Ripple Effect Project in 2012, I met Abraham. At that time, Abraham had had one surgery donated by someone in Norway on his right hand, and he had short digits and minimal use of his right hand, but his left hand was still greatly deformed and in a mid. And Abraham is a very quiet man, very unassuming servant. He was taking care of the animals. He'd often be seen tilling the soil, holding the instruments with his one usable hand and just placing his other hand to secure it. I returned with a team in 2016 to visit the Curando Center again, and Abraham's story touched one of the participants of that trip in such a way that he decided he wanted to sponsor Abraham's treatment of his left hand. Since 2016, we have been looking for a medical situation that could best help Abraham. At first, we thought to bring him to the United States, but our attempts to have that accomplished failed dismally, and we were left with the option of finding a doctor who would come to Kenya, perform the surgery here in your local hospital, St. Jairus. And we approached several different doctors, a list, and one of those doctors, Dr. Simon Talbot, called me one day and volunteered to come and offered his services to operate on Abraham. Dr. Talbot is a board-certified hand surgeon who has done surgeries around the world and is very well known for his high quality of work. He offered to come with his assistant, who is a physical assistant, Sarah Kinsley, and then we were able to make contact with an occupational therapist, because after the surgery, it's only useful as you learn to move the fingers that have not moved for 20 years. So the arrangements took about a year, and arrangements were made with St. Juris Hospital. The thing that compelled me about Abraham, because the medical care is good and remarkable, but the most remarkable thing about Abraham is his ability to learn to love and forgive the person who was the cause of this.
So the surgery went well. Abraham's surgery was about 5 hours long, with a few of us all working together, and with us working with the local surgeons as well. It went really well. Obviously, Abraham started with a hand that was really like a mitten, with his whole hand all joined together, all his fingers joined together, and missing the tips of many of the fingers. So there's only a limited amount that we can do to create a normal hand, and we'll never create a completely normal hand. We can only get closer to normal, and with the primary goal of having better function in the hand. So what we did was we separated out the lower part of his thumb from the lower part of his index finger, and then we took out the index finger bones to create a space between the thumb and the long finger, which will be something he can use to grip with. We were able to separate out the long finger and the ring finger, and they're quite bulky right now, and they don't have a lot of motion in them because he's been recovering so long from his burn that the joints are damaged in those fingers. And so at some stage in the future we'll probably need to come back and do some thinning of the tissues, some debulking of the tissues, and possibly bend those fingers into a more normal position for him to improve his grip. So all in all, things were very successful from a functional point of view for him, and our goal is that he'll get better with more occupational therapy and physical therapy, also lots of dressing changes and splinting, and most likely some stages in the future to try and improve from where we are. But we're through the first stage, we're through the most difficult part of his surgery, and now the recovery is the important part for Abraham.
Abraham's hand before surgery was basically a paddle. There's no real function to it. He could use it to stabilize objects, but there wasn't any grasping or any ability to manipulate objects with his hand. So after the surgery, what he now has is a thumb that is separate, a big web space so that he'll be able to hold objects like a rake in his hand. And we were able to separate out 2 of the fingers. There's not that much motion in those fingers from being so stuck for so long. So the main focus of therapy is going to be how much motion we can regain of his thumb so that he'll basically be able to do what's called a lateral pinch. Which is really, really functional. So if you think about when you're holding onto a plate, it's that type of pinch that you use in order to hold onto the plate. So the idea is that his right hand is going to be his main functional hand. That's the hand that he's already been using to write, to eat, to pick up small objects, to really interact. His left hand will be more of an assisted hand, so he'll be able to grip onto large objects, but not so much small objects with it. So for example, if he is out in the garden, he will now be able to hold on with both hands to the rake to be able to rake through. The grip again for his left is going to be, most likely it's going to be strong, but it's only going to be what's called a gross grasp, a very large grip. Where his right, he's going to be able to do all the more fine motor activities. It is going to be a very long recovery. So I would expect between 6 and 8 months of recovery, and the main focus in the beginning is going to be dressing changes and then going into some passive and active range of motion for his thumb. And then he'll continue to be wearing the splint for a few months just as protection, but also it's slowly helping to stretch out some of the tight ligaments that have been so caught up in scar tissue for so long. What we're aiming for is a more functional hand that allows him to do more activities with greater ease.